Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, when you watch the film Mugabe and the White African, you see how a white farmer and his family are suffering under the exceptionally cruel and unjust regime of Robert Mugabe and his racist land reform policies. You see them crying, you see them beaten, and you sympathize. You also see that the story is told from a single perspective. The perspective of a former South African apartheid officer and a current white farmer. You hear this white farmer, Mike Campbell, claim that the Mugabe land reform policies are prejudiced and that he deserved to keep his land. You see how throughout the film we hear nothing of a nearly identical land reform policy that was implemented against the blacks in the 1930s. We hear nothing of the blacks driven off their land at gunpoint and relocated to reservations while white Rhodesian soldiers were given their land that the natives had cultivated for generations. There is no mention of how whites exploited and oppressed the native people of Zimbabwe for 92 years, denying them the right to vote, run for parliament, or hold a high government position. The film only validates the position of the white farmer, insanely image put forth of Campbell and his family, and this twists the truth and the audience's perception of the situation. The audience is manipulated to sympathize with the Campbells because Lucy Bailey neglected the context that negatively affected her film. But did she have a requirement to show this historical context? Today, you listen to numerous testimonies by expert witnesses on both sides. You listen to leaders, humanitarians, authors, and students give their opinions on the complex subject of universal justice. Is context necessary regardless of the situation? As shown in Bono's testimony, despite the extremity of any situation, context is always necessary because there is no one-size-fits-all application of justice. What type of justice that works for one culture may not work for another. Bono, a renowned humanitarian, also showed that believing a requirement for context does not make Robert Mugabe's actions acceptable. What Robert Mugabe did was inappropriate, but that is not what we're here to discuss today. That is not what this trial is about. We are here to determine whether Lucy Bailey was required to give context in her film. Simply put, for anyone to fully understand the situation of Zimbabwe, they would need to realize that they endured 92 years of oppression. You also heard from a special political activist today, Mr. Mandela. Mr. Mandela tried fervently to earn freedom for South Africa using peaceful demonstrations, but time and time again, the South African government would squash his demonstrations with brutality. Mr. Mandela realized because of this brutality, there was no universal justice. The defense argues today that the idea of universal justice exists, and Robert Mugabe's actions were so appalling that context is not necessary. But today, Ken Burns acknowledged in his direct examination testimony that universal justice doesn't exist. Also today, Mahatma Gandhi acknowledged in his cross-examination testimony that universal justice does not exist. Two of the key witnesses for the other side both acknowledged in their testimonies that universal justice is simply a concept, not a reality. And this fantasy is not applicable to the situation in Zimbabwe, nor is it to any other. It is too broad and naive a concept to exist in our complex world. Lucy Bailey most definitely had a requirement to at least mention colonialism, let alone colonialism's lasting effects. It is these very effects that forced Mugabe to redistribute his land in the first place. As the repressive Rhodesian regime left Zimbabwe with a massive wealth and land disparity. But should you have only watched the movie, you would not know why the reforms were taking place. You would not know that at the time they started the reforms, 70% of the farmable land was owned by a 5% white minority. By neglecting to acknowledge multiple perspectives and omitting historical context, Bailey has created a false impression of Robert Mugabe and his policies, and is detrimental to his reputation. This is a criminal offense. Context is always necessary in any situation, for it brings truth and perspective that can change the severity of a crime. Quincy Bailey made a mistake of thinking her notion of justice applied to Zimbabwe. All I ask of you today is to not make the same mistake. Thank you for your time. That's all I wanted.